This is Mattingly Solutions coming at you for our latest Better Humans at Work episode. This is part of our series of reintroducing the team and just sharing, who we are, who our partners are, who our consultants are, and just to share, about the work we're doing. And so I'm super thrilled to be here with Certrice, my biz bestie, and our first ever DEIx consultant we had here at Mattingly, right? Chrissy Fontanese. So fun fact, Chrissy was our second Better Humans at Work episode ever, and she killed it. We talked about intersectional feminism. It was such a powerful conversation, and it was also I'm so excited to do more work with this amazing woman and have her brilliance and expertise serve our clients. And so, Chrissy, please take a moment to introduce yourself. I'm so excited for you to share about all the amazing stuff you do here with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. V. It's been my pleasure partnering with yourself and Certrice and all of our partners in the business, right? So a lot of other consultants doing the work that we all love to do with wonderful support. It has facilitated, my leadership development in terms of my own leadership development, but also the leadership development I do with executives and teams and organizations. And over the past, has it been about a year and a half-ish, something like that? We've served a lot of clients in a lot of different domains, from finance to education to technology. So I think the biggest thing that I walked away from this short time, when we've got plenty more of time ahead of us too, is that the work of DEI is applicable in every domain. So every organization, every structure, every system, the work applies everywhere. So that's been something that has just been proven out time and time again. And I couldn't ask to do this with a better team than this one.
Aw, Chrissy, thank you. So across all of the things that you've done over the past, like you said, it's been a while, about a year and a half. Is there one that stands out to you the most that you can tell us a little bit about? One of the things that you've enjoyed the most, or maybe learned something from? Yeah, what's something that stands out?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out the most are the ways in which policies and things have been rewritten. And when I say policies and things have been rewritten, what I'm really talking about is real change happening. So tying real metrics and real outcomes to diversity goals. And we've seen that in terms of, we've had clients go through and do pay audits on their own and see that, hey, there are disparities that we've never known about that are a real liability to us and to our people. We've seen policy handbooks completely rewritten where, people's bonuses and so forth, and their things that they are routinely, compensated for throughout the year. There are now DEI goals incorporated in that, so that DEI is coming from a leadership down and from a workforce up perspective. So it's a two-way thing. And I think really the biggest thing is, whenever you're talking about the industries and the businesses that we work within and that we are invited into, a lot of times, for example, like the finance and banking industry, whenever policies are rewritten in those fields and in those industries, it has long-term downstream impact on a lot of historically marginalized groups. So, if I could really boil it down, that's the work of the work. That's the stuff that I think a lot of us in this work do it for.
Yeah, I think what's so important there is that we're finally starting to see some of that, right? And it all comes down to, that's the equity piece. It's people finally moving beyond just tracking your diversity numbers and thinking that that's it. And I think one of my favorite parts of what you said is some of them are doing that on their own or having that idea, and we're seeing that happen without us just having to tell them, like, this is a best practice. You should be looking at this.
Yeah. And I think on top of that, in the many years that I've been doing this work leading up to the last couple of years, whenever it became a lot more at the forefront, the biggest problem was having the conversations, right? Making that space to have these conversations and then put some teeth behind it in terms of, if this is what we say we want, how do we get there? Just even broaching that conversation. And so over the span of, the last year and a half, we've built a lot of really great products around that as well. one of which, and I think Dr. V, you might be able to talk a little bit more about this, is Project Heal, and a major focus of that is to create that space for people to have those conversations and then create that path forward.
Yeah, and so it's so funny because you said multiple products, and that wasn't the one I was even thinking you're going to say. So very validating. It really is multiple products. So yeah, Project Heal, part of that program really is, giving executives some good information and saying, having them come to that realization. And we actually had an executive say, I could have cried. I was so proud, so happy in that moment. We were talking about neurodiversity. Actually, it was a week we were talking about neurodiversity. The way we think about allyship, there's broad allyship behaviors, but then there's also very specific things that you need to know about certain communities and histories and different accommodations and needs, right? And so we had this whole executive leadership session about neurodiversity. And at the end, one of the leaders said, we're rolling out these leadership competencies soon, right? And this is going to be the basis of how our future leaders are promoted and hired, and what the evaluation if they're doing a job or not. And we have a whole section on interpersonal. And how is that accommodating a workforce that we're trying to create space for whenever there's research that shows that they might, that group might score lower on this particular competency? So how do we build in an accommodation before, while we're still actively building these? And I'm like, that's the work, like you said, Chrissy, that's the work. It's so amazing. And so having those conversations and going there, that's what we titled the session today, going there with these executives and those who were in the position to make the policy change. So that was the one thing. And the second product, just real briefly, this came directly from what our clients were asking for, and the systems level, the equity work that Sertrice said, that this equity systems work that Chrissy's been doing with our clients the last year and a half. And so we started with, most audits, let's be honest, they're checklists, right? But the checklist just feels so overwhelming. And so it's not just the checklist, but the clients that worked closely on a weekly basis with Chrissy going through this list and the work that happened around it. So please, Chrissy, if you could share a little bit more about our pre-audit, and then I can talk more about what it's going to transform into.
Yeah. So the great thing, oh gosh, there's so many. But one of the great things was, and one of my favorite parts of the work is when clients come in, they kind of come in sort of gingerly, and there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear of things staying the same and a lot of fear of things never changing. And that I think is a universal thing, for almost everybody that comes to us. But one of the things that I see over and over again, and it delights me to no end, is whenever people realize you already, for the most part, have a lot more diversity in your workplace than you realize. I think that whenever people think of diversity, they think of the visual identity markers of what, visually might make somebody different from the dominant group. But that doesn't really account for a lot of the different diversity markers that people have. So there are a lot of times where, I'll put it this way, in every organization, there is some form of diversity. And I think that a lot of the programming and the audit especially is just saying, hey, you've already got this diverse workforce. And if you'd like to keep them happy and keep your customers happy and your stakeholders happy, here's how you create the environment. So when we're talking about leadership, when you're talking about DEI, you're talking about leadership. And what is a leader's job, right? The leader is the gardener. You can tell a flower to grow all day long, but unless you create the right environment and you create, the right water and the right nutrition, it's not going to work. And especially if you've got tomatoes in one and peppers in another and flowers in another, they all have different needs. But as leadership, it is your job to be the gardener in that ecosystem. And everybody within an organization has a leadership role, whether it is an overt or, one that you see on a org chart, like a power structure kind of thing, or if it's just in terms of here's who we want to be, here's who we are, and who we will continue to be as an organization. So the audit really helps you think of those things that maybe slide under the radar that you don't think of in the moment. And it also is a great check too, just to be sure that because as we know, DEI is not a one-time sort of training thing. That's not what it is. It's a lifelong commitment. And so it helps you keep yourself on track, not only for your short-term goals or what you want to change right now, but the 3, 5, 10-year plan. It helps you set that roadmap in motion.
Yeah, I want to check in on one of my favorite parts of this too, and it kind of makes me laugh because we haven't said it yet. So the full product name that I love it's our DEIx Audit to Action, right? It's in the reason we were really cautious with how we labeled this is that it's not just that check the box, and you both touched on this. It is the action piece, right? It's the, okay, what now? Now that we've reviewed what you've done, we figured out where you are in our readiness model, we're like, okay, what are you going to do? What are your next steps? Because just knowing what you've done and where you are and patting yourself on the back for what's happened so far, that's not enough. So I think that's the really important piece that you both touched on, and that I love in that naming convention too. So, and I think one other piece I really wanted to call out about it is that it's one of my favorite parts of working here is how we make a point to partner with people when we're developing our services. And so that's our clients on one hand, it's other people in the field, but then it's all of our partners. So I love how much you've had a hand in this. Every single person at Mattingly Solutions has touched this audit in some way and helped us get there. So I just want to, I think Victoria already said this, but I want to thank you again for everything that you've done to help us get it into the state it's in. And I'm excited to also see the next version and the next version, because we're going to keep learning more in this space and things are going to be changing. And so the audit itself will also always need to be, in a fluid state, so to speak.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Sir Tracy. I bring this up and I think it's one of the hallmarks of the work that we do. And that is that our partnerships, right? So I won't do, especially the racial inclusion work without voices of people of color. I won't do the LGBTQIA work without voices from that community. So to any marginalized group to which I do not belong, we have somebody in our team that belongs to that group to be that another set of eyes and to be that person. So all of that to say, I think the teamwork here is the key, right? So no one of us fits into every one of those categories, and that's what we recognize about each other, and that's one of the value adds that we bring to the table, is that we bring at least a voice from every one of those historically marginalized groups to our work, and we're deeply invested in it.
Well, and just the other day, Sir Teresa and I did a workshop on DEI data best practices, because that's our favorite topic ever. Hashtag Inclusilytics, get our book, it's all about it. But someone asked a really good question with focus groups, and should a focus group, if you're doing a targeted focus group like around one identity, should the facilitator share that identity? And we say a huge yes. It's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of paradoxes in DEI work, right? Because we're trying to create inclusive cultures for everyone, but we need to get down to these group differences, these identities, to be able to serve everyone, because people need support in different ways, right? And there's different gaps, and there's different nuances with maybe a gender issue versus a race issue versus a sexual orientation issue, or fill in the blank, right? And so I just think that's so powerful. And once again, that first conversation we had, Chrissy, about intersectional feminism, like that came loud and true. And I always recommend the book Hood Feminism to any women's ERGs, because it's like, it takes that approach of like, feminism that doesn't think about all women is not real feminism, right? And so I just love that. But the audit. So, HEAL. Okay, specific groups, right? So Project HEAL. I wanted to go back to Project HEAL. So Chrissy and our second, so number 2, hired DEI consultant Michael Thornhill, who will be our next guest. But they did some really amazing work with some organizations where we got into this kind of, honestly, we're discriminating between groups, right? Like that's such like a bad word in this space, but when it's intentional and we're keeping everyone along on the journey of why we're doing it, and we have that purpose and we have the right facilitators, right, to like do this work, it can be really transformational. And Chrissy, I'd love for you to speak to, just to kind of set the stage. We met with this organization, the staff, and we had a session, all of it, like Chrissy and Michael were together. We talked about why we were there. We were talking about equity, what that could look like, what the role would be like. And it was a very homogenous organization, right? Very white, let's be honest. And then we decided to split and go off in breakout rooms, whereas Chrissy stayed with everyone who identified as white in that room. And then Michael went to a breakout room with those who identified as not being white, right? So that's the stage. And we went there. And Chrissy, tell us like how that went, like what types of even just initial like signs of transformation or like the conversation starting, you know, like I just love to hear your perspectives and how that went for you.
Yeah. So two things. First is that lived experience is incredibly important when we're talking about historically marginalized groups. So there's a trust level that is present with folks who have been through a similar lived experience as yourself. So that's one. And I think the thing that always comes back to me in focus groups or even just, one-on-one executive interviews is that folks from the predominant group don't often recognize the ways in which racism and sexism and ableism actually hinder their experience and their lives as well. Homophobia does not just harm the LGBTQIA plus community. Racism does not just harm people of color. It harms everybody. It harms people globally. It keeps people from having relationships that they would have otherwise had. It keeps people from business partnerships. It keeps people from, banking and finance, things that they would typically have access to, and that cross the board. And I will go as far as to say that in those conversations and in those sort of small groups where you are broken off into people who have shared lived experiences, that's really how I prefer to think of it. Mm-hmm. That creates space for those conversations to be had. So, one example is that there are people who have been in relationships with people that they thought were maybe completely straight, right? But then they found out that their partner, in fact, preferred to be with people of the same gender. So in that instance, that is, this is the person telling their story, right? That was an instance where a person who identified as straight understood that they were likely the victim of the victims of homophobia, right? So they aren't actually part of the LGBTQIA community, but they were in relationship with a person who was, but didn't share that information with them. And so that was the first time that they themselves felt victimized by homophobia, right? So in other words, I share that to say, there's dozens of stories just like that. There are dozens of experiences just like that. And that's the real transformational piece is how do we make it so that people who have had shared lived experiences can share those experiences with people who have historically weaponized those experiences, and create a way for it to be, hey, this isn't just my experience or your experience. We're all living through a dysfunctional thing here. And how do we fix it? What's the innovation? How do we innovate this so that this doesn't continue to be a cycle that's perpetuated until the end of time?
Yeah. And that's why there is so much power in having that facilitator also have that shared live experience, is because it helps build that trust versus someone who doesn't, who's sitting there and, they can't really contribute to the conversation in the same way and things like that. But one thing I will lean into there is for people who do this work, and something that we're very cautious of is tokenism, right? So as a Black woman in this space, I can think of a very recent experience where someone reached out and said, hey, I want to go in on this proposal, but I need a Black person. Are you interested? Do you want to learn more? And I'm like, I don't know you. I have never spoken to you. You just picked me because of my color. And like, that is icky to me. That is not okay. And so that's why it's so important for you to, if you are in the DEI space, if you're doing these focus groups, if you're having tough conversations, make a point to build your network in a genuine way. Make connections with people who are different from you. Make connections with people who have those lived experiences. So then when those needs come up, you do know that person. So that's why, Chrissy, I know things about you. I can call on you and say, I want someone with X experience, and you're not going to feel icky. You're like, oh, you remembered this about me. You know this about me. You're respecting my opinion. You value me as a consultant in the DEI space. And I can speak to this versus, oh, you're just picking me because someone listed me as having this identity. So it's finding that boundary. And I know it can be really tricky, but it all goes back to building genuine relationships.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that. So, twofold on that as well is that, anybody who has any subject matter expertise in DEI, I think that being invited in is incredibly important. That's one. And two, that's the other piece to what we've done over the past year and a half that I've really, really loved seeing is calling out whenever organizations are tokenizing folks and tokenizing employees. We saw that it seems very much like in order to get that subject matter expertise, a lot of leadership teams will look directly toward their Black employees, right? And that is something that has gone on for many decades before any of us have been alive and been doing this work. But shifting that away from, lived experience does in fact make somebody a subject matter expert. And if you would like them to take on this role as a person in your organization, how will you be compensating them differently? How will you free up their time and take responsibilities off their plate? What kind of teams will you be giving them? What kind of access to the leadership team and sitting in and on that leadership team will you be giving them? So again, it comes down to it's threefold. It's diversity, equity, inclusion, and then I'd say actually fourfold, and adding belonging onto that. So compensating people appropriately and effectively for the expertise that they bring to the table, and not just assuming that every historically marginalized person is a monolith and can speak on every topic of diversity, equity, inclusion. That's not true. There are so many intersections, and while some people certainly come up against multiple intersections, that doesn't mean that one person, I have yet to meet one person who can effectively deliver and consult and is a subject matter expert on every single intersection that is possible within the DEI space. So,
or just that if you're from a historically marginalized group, you can speak to DEI at all. I don't know how many times I see people that are like, yeah, my organization asked me something. I don't know the answer. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm just Black.
Yeah. So that's the other piece is taking some of the labor off of the folks who've historically had to do it, emotional labor and actual labor. So,
well, and at the end of the day, we all have a role to play. Like, this is culture change work. We are shifting what was acceptable even 5 or 10 years ago. And what's no longer acceptable. We are crafting the way people want to be treated in the workplace and having that lens of DEI to do it. And so you need to be all in to get this work accomplished, right? This isn't, and so everyone has a role. And, you think about like getting the majority, right? And so it's like when we talk about things like whiteness, and I started DEI in the gender space, like talking to men, inviting men in. Like, we cannot achieve gender equity when 95 of the positions are held by men, right? We need y'all to work with us. It's the same thing. And that's why I love, Chrissy, you just have such an amazing ability to go there about these sensitive topics, but in a way that is psychologically safe, in a way that is validating, because this work is tough, and like, you go there and that's where the magic really happens. And it is about going where it's uncomfortable, and but then that's how we start to change and shift. And so so I think we want to talk a little bit about the future. I know Sir Treese had a question about that, so I'll turn it over to Sir Treese.
Yeah, no, all good. Just before we wrapped up our convo for today, I just wanted to check in with you, Chrissy. Where do you see the future? You can take it in whichever direction you want, either the future of Mattingly and where you see that growth going, or just the future in DEI. What direction do you think things are going? What are you excited about seeing, hoping to see from organizations as we go?
Yeah, I spent a pretty good time thinking about both over the last year and a half. I think the direction for Mattingly is nowhere but up, right? Our work speaks for itself. I think that our partnerships are expanding in terms of our consultants that we work with. And again, we only work with really trusted consultants and people who are well seasoned in this work. So having those folks on board is incredible, and it creates that environment where we can have those real conversations. And then the work of DEI is a never-ending one. I have tremendous hope, especially as organizations are really galvanizing their DEI goals into their organizational structure. They're making it a non-negotiable, that these are things that are absolutely going to be part of any organization that wants to thrive in the future. There are so many organizations that see that is an absolute requirement, right? So I see it becoming, I hope to see it becoming second nature, just baked into the process in the same way that any other sort of historical work norms are, right? Just as I wouldn't show up to a client's office in swimwear and flip-flops, same thing in our hiring practices and in our promoting practices, and just across the board, just best business practices. I'd like to see DEI really baked into just best leadership and business practices, full stop.
Yeah. Don't we all, man?
Yes.
I think about this so often. I'm like, wait, is it today? Are we accepting this? Are we normalizing it today? No, not today. All right. Yeah. I'll think about this again tomorrow. Check in, get a pulse. I was just doing some focus groups with a client and was talking to their employees, and it was so funny because they were like, I'm just ready to see some real action. We talk about a lot of things, but I want to see the follow through, which is such a common thing. I'm pretty sure I could say that about any focus group I've led. And I was like, hey, I mean, I'm here, right? And I'm sticking around for a while, so I'm gonna see what I can do. Fingers crossed. And it was funny because we're at the employees. I'm hopeful. The employees are hopeful. And we're all like, hopefully we see it. So definitely in organizations, but in industry wide as well. So this was so fun. I'm really glad you were able to join us, Chrissy, and that you've just been with us on this journey again, for so long, a year and a half now. It's been a pleasure having you. I look forward to keeping you around. You're not allowed to leave. So, and so it's been really good. And then to everyone watching, if you are not already connected with Chrissy, definitely reach out, connect with her on LinkedIn if you want to learn more about her journey, her client work, anything like that. Definitely do not hesitate to reach out. And then if you want to talk about partnering with her, or if you're interested in any of the solutions we discussed today, definitely feel free to contact us. And I know we dropped in chat our contact us form. You can schedule a consultation. We're happy to help you figure out where your company is in this journey and addressing whiteness in the right ways, because it's hard, So thanks for joining us today. V, you want to say anything before we sign off?
Just, everyone's responding to all the things, and no one knows like the right thing to say or the wrong thing to say, or if they should say. And so like, my whole theme these last few weeks has just been like, make space. And like, Chrissy's really good at making space. That's really making that space, and just being sometimes is part of the work as well. And so just make space. But I'm just so grateful that you make space for our clients, and we all growing our Mattingly space together. So have a great day. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'm excited to continue this journey on learning how to all be better humans.